most teachers I know can point to one moment in their childhood as their teacher origin story. The event that made them teach the thing that they teach, the thing that got them so interested that they made it their calling. If I'm ever asked, which happens somewhat frequently, I usually point to an independent study project I did in the 5th grade. I got to choose whatever I wanted, and for the first few days, I struggled to even pick a topic, but eventually, I landed on the Black Death. It was an event that felt impossible to wrap my head around at first, and diving into the project made me understand for the first time that idea of the past being a foreign country. I felt like I couldn't read fast enough to satisfy my curiosity, and when the project was over, I didn't want to stop. When it was time, I gave a presentation complete with a grotesquely handmade model to my horrified classmates as my teacher beamed at me from the back of the room. 25 years later, and the Black Death has suddenly become way more relevant to the rest of the world than I ever thought it would be. But for me, it came up again 3 years ago when I first started teaching at the Denver Green School. I knew, stepping into my 7th grade world history class, that I wanted to do a unit looking at pandemics like the Black Death. It had gotten me into teaching history, after all. Surely there were kids sitting in my classroom for whom it would be a source of fascination. What I didn't realize then was that not only would my pandemics unit be the topic that my whole class was most excited to learn about, they are in fact children after my own heart, but that it would also show me just how important history in general is for middle school students. When my students step into the classroom for the first time, many of them have this idea in their heads that studying history, especially world history, is pointless and irrelevant. But obviously, I wouldn't be doing this if I thought that were true. No. What I would like to share today is what I discovered while teaching about pandemics during a pandemic, and what I hope all of you will discover for yourselves every day that you step into your classroom. That kids can use the knowledge and critical thinking built through studying history to empathize with others and cope with difficult and unexpected events in their own lives. The pandemics unit, which has actually grown into a unit I call Diseases and Disasters, sprung out of my realization that when I'm interested in a topic, my students love it more. Enthusiasm is contagious. And even the kids who start out just kind of humoring me find themselves fascinated. I'm the only social studies teacher at my school, and so by the time I teach this unit in January, my 7th graders have had a grand total of 4 solid months of instruction on historical analysis, using geographic tools, applying the economic concepts of supply and demand to both historical situations and modern day life. And the Diseases and Disasters unit is where we put it all together. We cover human geography standards like population density. We analyze sources as diverse as plague narratives from ancient writers like Thucydides to medical data from the World Health Organization. And we apply evidence-based reasoning to some historical questions that still have yet to be answered. What amazes me most as I teach this unit every year is just how fully the kids dive into sources that only months before they would have struggled with. It's a great checkpoint for me as a teacher. Students get to their end of unit project able to link the actions of a government or authority figure to specific harms done to a people in a disaster or pandemic, back up their thoughts with solid evidence from the sources, and for their end of unit project, create an art piece alongside a written explanatory paragraph with correctly cited sources, of course, that express the long-term impacts of the event on the people that suffered, the community that was affected, and the world at large. This year, we were just wrapping up new instruction on the unit as people were beginning to discuss the emergence of a coronavirus in Wuhan, China. For one Current Events Friday at the start of February, every single one of my 7th graders and most of my 8th graders who had had the unit last year brought in a variety of news articles on COVID-19. And we spent the full class period making connections between the unit we were doing and the emerging pandemic that my students were convinced we should be taking way, way more seriously. I'm sure it will be fine, I told them, clearly lying through my teeth. Throughout late February, students completed their end of unit projects and turned in incredible work detailing the impact of Hurricane Katrina on the people of New Orleans, or the eruption of Mount Tambora on world weather patterns, or the 1918 influenza pandemic on the world's population. One student even created a streetscape of San Francisco during the 1906 earthquake that actually moved to simulate aftershocks. It was amazing. And through it all, my students kept asking more excellent questions about COVID-19. Why wasn't the government taking the CDC's recommendations? Why were there already shortages of personal protective equipment, and why weren't we mobilizing to make more? Why did our president not seem to be taking it seriously? Did he really think that this was going to just disappear? I realized early on that my kids were not just asking great questions about the situation they were watching unfold in front of them. I mean, every teacher who's been doing this for a while will tell you that kids will always ask amazing questions when given the opportunity and someone who is actually willing to listen to them. No, my students were asking informed questions. They were asking the kind of questions that I would expect a journalist to ask, or a historian. They were using the knowledge that they had been building through 6 weeks of learning about all the ways that a government can make a disaster worse, and applying that knowledge to create some incisive observations about their world. At that point, around the first week of March, I had a moment where my human brain and my teacher brain kind of like parted ways for a little bit. My human brain was extremely worried. What would happen if school was closed? How would my kids get what they needed? What if there were food shortages? What if there were large-scale layoffs and my kids' parents lost their jobs? What if? But my teacher brain looked at everything, looked at the next unit I was starting and thought, what if I turned COVID-19 into a unit? My reasoning was this. My kids seemed to be a lot calmer about the world and what the world was going through than most adults I knew, who were either in the head in the sand phase or were in the panic buying toilet paper phase. Having that knowledge about past pandemics, especially the 1918 influenza pandemic, seemed to me to open their eyes to the reality of what the world was facing and spark questions that I really wanted them to be able to investigate further. So after running it by my administration, who are very used to me just getting an idea out of the blue and chasing it, I created a unit on COVID-19 and I began teaching it on March 9th, which was the last week of school before the shutdown. Everyone's plans shifted, including my plans of what I would be teaching and when. But in the weeks and months that have followed, I have observed something really interesting in my students. That calm and that insight that they showed to me during the emergence of the pandemic at the end of January and through February, it continued on during remote learning. They were still asking great, specific questions about the responses of local, national, and world authorities to this crisis and investigating those answers. And in many cases, they were answering questions for their parents and siblings about what it meant to flatten the curve, or what precautions to take, or what was most likely to happen next. I think it's an understatement to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us all a lot of unexpected and mostly unwelcome lessons. There's no silver lining. People have died. Our communities are suffering. And our students have lost time with us that we can never get back. I am grateful that I got the time that I did with this group of 7th graders, and I am especially grateful that I got to teach the Diseases and Disasters unit as my last unit before the shutdown, because it showed me a few things. First, it reminded me that kids will always be more interested in something that they see you get excited about. They know how much I love teaching this unit because I tell them. Not just at the beginning of the unit, but also at the beginning of the school year and at the beginning of every unit up until I get to this unit. And so even the kid who sits in the back and he keeps trying to pull up his hoodie so that you don't notice that he has an earbud tucked in, even that kid gets hype when we talk about catapulting plague corpses during the siege of Kaffa or the ghost ships sailing into Genoa Harbor. And while you might not have the freedom to devote a whole unit to your weirdo passion project like I have with the pandemics, most of us do have the ability to find something in the geographic locations or the eras or the themes that we're teaching that really makes us geek out. I think you should carve out as much time as you can manage to do a deep dive on that topic with your kids. Let them see you get excited about it, and then watch them share in your passion. Second, kids are so much more capable than most people give them credit for. And with proper scaffolding and adaptation of material for reading level, they can engage in real historical arguments. I didn't learn what historiography was until I was in college. But my students participate in their own ways in the construction of history in the same way that they will at the post-secondary level as they formulate their own arguments about, for example, what kind of pathogen was responsible for the plague of Athens. There is no reason students in this day and age should come out of middle school with the misconception that history is whatever was written in a textbook handed down from the history gods on high. Students can engage in the work of building history if you just trust their intelligence. What this can mean for teachers, and something I recommend all teachers of history at every level do, is think outside the textbook. There are excellent databases of primary sources that you can investigate and adapt. They're often connected with colleges and universities, and most of the time, professors at the university level have created primary source sets that they are absolutely thrilled to share with a teacher at the secondary level. The history community at the post-secondary level is an amazing resource that not enough of us who work with younger kids think to tap into. As you plan your units, I encourage you to reach out to historians specializing in the topics that you're teaching. Help your students understand that the history gods, they don't actually exist, but we are all a part of a larger historical community that constructs history together. Last, this crisis has reminded me that the connections that kids make between past and present in history classes like mine helps an uncertain world feel much less scary and mysterious. The biggest question most of us have to answer at some point when we teach history seems to be, why are we even doing this? So many other subjects seem self-evident. We learn math so we can function in the world. We learn to read so that we can function in the world. We learn science so that we can clean our homes without accidentally making mustard gas and killing ourselves. But with history, especially in the wrong hands, it can feel dry and irrelevant. I mean, you're not gonna accidentally poison yourself if you don't know that the Black Plague came to Europe from Genoese traders in 1347. So what? In the careful hands of teachers who believe in our students' ability and the value of what we are doing, history serves a deeply human purpose that feeds something deep inside us. If social distancing has taught us anything, it's that the human animal seeks connection first. When we teach history, we are helping students find those connections that turn a huge, scary, unknowable world into a world full of people that they can actually understand. They see a chain of events that they are a part of, and they construct meaning from these events that help them come to grips with what they see unfolding before them. They see that history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but as the aphorism that has been falsely ascribed to Mark Twain goes, it does rhyme. All the work that my students do to be able to meet the standards in the 4 social studies disciplines is work that they can never undo, even though they might want to sometimes. Once you start to look at the world through the lens of historical thinking, you really can't stop. My students know how to apply historical context to current events because they have practiced it over and over. They know when to be skeptical of a claim, for instance, that the coronavirus will just disappear in a few weeks like a miracle. They can discern who in the public sphere is speaking from a place of hard-won expertise and who is speaking from a place of, let's call it, wishful thinking. Their knowledge is their armor, and they will carry these tools with them for the rest of their lives. What is school for? If not to provide the students with the tools to build understanding and to connect with their own power. I am proud that my history classroom plays a role in developing my incredible students into the young leaders that will help us cope when the next disaster hits, which my students will tell you, it probably will at some point. At least I know they'll be ready.